Good evening. Welcome. Uh, we've been on a little bit on hiatus. It's been kind of difficult because of the Seger, getting back to school, holidays, but we're glad you joined us this evening, and good afternoon for those of you over there in America. Just a word from our sponsor first. We're still working on Haggadah Pesach, the English version. There you go. And right now we're trying to sell the last copies of the Hebrew version. It's going to be kind of hard to go to print, to go to press until we sell out the first run. And those who want to donate toward the production of the English version, that would be very welcome. Just check out my website, go to GoFundMe, Patreon, etc., and you can help it make it become a reality. Recently, people have requested also that we start making this in French. Quite a few neighbors who have requested that. So if I guess we'll work on that next year. God willing, we'll get the funding for it. Want to speak something about issues that came up in this week's parasha that actually touch on issues of the day, and that is the issues of prophecy. I'll give a little bit of a background, something we discussed in previous years and then the previous months, and we'll put it all together. The first thing was that Ha'azinu, this week's parasha, is a song that Moshe Rabbeinu was told to teach to the Israelites, the Jewish people, right before his death. And as I pointed out, it seems that there's a lot that's repeated in the parasha of Vayelech. That was what we read, not last week, 2 weeks ago. The Rosh Hashanah holiday interrupted the regular schedule of our Siddarot. One of the things that we see is that Moshe Rabbeinu first told everybody he was going to die. He doesn't say today. He says today's my birthday, but I'm very close to the death, and he gives his farewell address to the people. He writes a Torah, he hands it over to the Leviim, and he tells them the purpose of the Sefer is one day, after the Shemitah year, they're going to read it. There's a yearly mitzvah to gather up all the people and read the Torah, and it'll keep everybody nice and good. They'll learn to fear God and learn to keep the commandments, bring all the children. In practice, that meant that he was telling them to take out the Torah and read it. When? Well, it would take 14 years for them to conquer and divide up the land, and then another 6 years to count the Shemitah, and another year to have a Shemitah. And then, after that, in the 22nd year, that would be the first time they would perform the mitzvah of Hakel, and they would read the Torah to them. And then God summoned Moshe Rabbeinu to the tent of meeting with Joshua, and he told them, you're going to die today, and they're going to go off the derech very soon. And suddenly Moshe is desperate, and he's told to teach them the song to remind them what to do. And then he goes through everything he went through at the beginning of the parasha. Suddenly he has to rewrite all his Sifrei Torah and hand it back to the Kohanim and the Leviim and tell them, actually, teach it to the people right now. You have to teach them the song this very day I'm about to die. And I pointed out this seems to be the basis for what was the historical practice for centuries, if not millennia, to read Ha'azinu on a weekly basis as part of the temple service every Saturday. Every Shabbos as part of the service, and it so happens that's the precedent that Moshe Rabbeinu gave. This very day, in the middle of the Sabbath on which he passed away, that's when he told people this song. Now, what is Ha'azinu about? Ha'azinu is a forever reminder of how we can learn the historical lessons that the Torah is trying to teach us and how we're supposed to keep that Torah. Someone asks, we don't really need Moshe Rabbeinu around anymore. He has passed away. But he left us something. He left us his legacy. We have one of Maimonides' principles of the faith is that there won't be a prophet greater than Moses ever again. He was the greatest. And that his Torah is unchanging. He's already given us everything. We don't need another Moshe Rabbeinu because everything has already been given to us. It would be redundant to have him again. Eventually, the prophets also died out. We haven't produced a prophet in a long time. As Rabbi Victor Miller pointed out, historically, in early Second Temple times, they were still apparently waiting for prophets to arise, just like at the time of the judges, prophets were few and far between. You could go a century or two without a legitimate prophet showing up and instructing the people. It wasn't something they're so alarmed by. It never happened again. And we've been waiting quite a while. But it was something that was natural. They didn't think that suddenly God shut off the line. But then again, we don't necessarily need new prophets. They already said everything they have to say. We have their books. We now just have to put into practice. Like the Chazal said, the Messiah will be here if we just do what we are supposed to do. So Moshe Rabbeinu is also He's still with us. We don't need another Moshe Rabbeinu. He gave us Ha'azinu. He gave us this already, and everything we need is already in front of us. We just have to understand it. A few months ago, I was talking about the rabbis who were looking for the Ark of the Covenant. I pointed out from all those biblical sources and also historical sources that it seems that already in times of King Josiah, before the destruction of the first temple, they already realized that they do not need the Ark of the Covenant. It is something that actually misled the people. Just like in the times of Samuel, when he was a young man, the people thought that the Ark was going to save them. They were treating the Ark almost like a type of idol. So too, eventually the people started treating the temple itself, the repository of the Ark, this is in the book of Jeremiah, that they thought no harm could come to them because the temple's in their midst. God occupies the temple, at least in their eyes, and no harm could come to it. And they were misled. So we don't want these things necessarily to come up. We don't necessarily want the Ark of the Covenant to be found. I think it would actually be harmful. I think it would be, perhaps people would be led astray once again and act idolatrously toward it. So we don't necessarily want to find these things. Rabbi Avigdor Miller said you don't want a prophet necessarily because people are not going to listen to the prophet anyways. Yet, there have been movements within Judaism, always just a little bit away from the mainstream or far away from the mainstream, and they haven't accepted this. They still think that prophecy is still among us. I'll give examples. There is a lot let's say in the Talmud and halachic codes, where a halachic statement is made, and it's actually without basis. It seems just like a lucky guess, and it's called jokingly divrei neviut, words of prophecy. Why? Because unless this fellow was a prophet, there's no way he could have known that. There's no way we could establish the veracity of his statement. That's what's it's not derisive, but it's sort of said cynically that these are words of prophecy. The problem is that there have been a few times in Jewish history where we've seen some of this divrei neviut really take hold. And indeed, some followers treat the expositors of these ideas as almost prophets. I'm thinking, for example, of, let's say, the great masters of Kabbalah and Chassidut. The way, certainly, a lot of Sephardic and Hasidic Judaism and now Haradite Judaism treat let's say the teachings of the Ari and the Baal Shem Tov and the Shla and others, they treat them almost like they are Nevi'im, because these things sometimes are so different from the halachic consensus as it was. Nowadays we're used to this. People do Hasidic practice and Kabbalistic practices all the time, which don't really fit with the straight letter of the halacha. They basically treat these people, these great figures, as sort of prophets, and I don't think that's that's not problematic per se. They could do so. I think the Rambam was also expecting to find prophets, although the difference between, let's say, a Litvish, or what used to be Litvish, but now what they would call rational modern Orthodox Judaism, I'm not talking left-wing Orthodox Judaism, they do not have any prophets. They do not fight the Hasidic movement, they do not fight the Kabbalists anymore, but they have not accepted this idea that they would treat these figures as almost prophets, if not prophets themselves. And then we get to, even later, I remember reading Rabbi Miller's books. Rabbi Miller was as Litvish as they come. He was actually trained in Lithuanian yeshivas, and his going over this point that there are no prophets anymore was very important. Why? Because the first time I heard a Rav get up, a Mashgiach get up, and basically expound the modern Haradite philosophy and theory with regards to Das Torah, or Dot Torah, whatever you call it, or just an American Das Torah. And basically what he was saying sounded like Divrei Neviut. He was saying that certain figures are infallible, and they must be right just because they have a God connection. They know they're getting their messages from on high, and they cannot be wrong. That was basically a form of Neviut. Das Torah. I can't believe I didn't see this. Rav Lichtenstein didn't mention this, and others who've had halachic/academic analyses of the phenomenon of Das Torah and its adherents have neglected to mention that Das Torah is basically almost is a claim that the possessor of the Das Torah is almost like a Navi. And that is why, let's say, just mainstream Judaism, just to the left of the Haradite camp that is the proponent of this view, hasn't accepted it because it smacks of the claim that these people are basically prophets. And on the left side, you get this a lot. This is unfortunate. This comes up this week. I used to jokingly refer to President Obama, and also in his candidacy, I used to jokingly refer to him among people who know me as Mashiach, because people were basically treating this politician, and that's what he is, politicians, just like any other politicians. I do not like politicians on any side of the ocean or on any side of the political aisle. They're all politicians, and people forget that. People treat their politicians as though they are role models. They are not. People treat their politicians as though they're tzaddikim. As the Rambam said, they are not. They're usually risha'im. That means they do averos. The only thing we could hope is that politicians would let the Jews do what they need to do and not persecute them and keep law and order. And that's the most we can expect for them. And if we get that, we should be very happy, and then we could even praise them. Talking about political leaders, of course. So Obama, they were treating like a Mashiach. And there were Jewish people who claimed the mantle of Orthodoxy, were basically fawning all over their Mashiach. And they even create prophets out of their religious figures and some political figures. This week, people sent me the video. I don't know who took the video. It was on Rosh Hashanah, apparently, in some Reformed congregation. And as people have said before, Reformed Judaism is basically political leftism in a building that's meant as a synagogue, but it's not a synagogue. And they recited the blessing on the Haftorah. And if Reformed Jews want to keep halacha, that's fine. They could recite blessings. I hope that in every Reformed synagogue this Sabbath, they suddenly decide to do it like the Orthodox do. That would be a good thing for them to do. They recite the blessing, and then they read from the words of Ruth Bader Ginsburg as though it had Trupp. Aside from the fact that they got the Trupp all wrong. Trupp is actually a science. You can't just sing it like it sounds like Haftorah. That doesn't make it Trupp. But they basically are declaring that Mrs. Ginsburg, who was a politician and a judge, I don't think she was evil in any way, but she certainly wasn't a Jewish religious figure. She was a woman who happened to be Jewish. And they're treating her like one of the prophetesses. That is essentially wrong. But you understand that these groups treat their people as prophets. And that's okay, because Judaism does that. Actual Judaism also does that. We treat people, we raise them up. And the point is that real Jews who think about this, I don't mean real Jews, I don't mean to disparage the non-Orthodox. I mean Jews who put their mind to what they're doing. Jews, people, Yisrael struggles with God. Jews who are actually interested in figuring out the truth know that prophecy could exist and that there are the equivalent of false prophets nowadays. Just like in the olden days there were false prophets, nowadays there are certain religious figures who are also false. They're charlatans. And we create these prophets. We declare people like Ruth Bader Ginsburg as a prophet because we know that sometimes our own religious figures might be misleading us, sometimes intentionally. Rabbi Victor Miller pointed out there were those idealistic false prophets, those who believed they should have been prophets, and they imagined that they were, and they weren't telling the people to do anything bad. They were just misleading people with their optimism that they had reached prophecy, and the optimism that they were helping the people by giving them this message. And then there were the ones who were actually sinister. They were in it for their own personal gain and pleasure. That exists. We have seen those people. They've created whole commandments out of nothing. They've rewritten history. They get their sources wrong. We've given examples of this. You can look on the website. It's plain to see when they make up that holiday, that the first of Elul is a classic Jewish holiday, the New Year for animals, that is ancient. That's when Jews celebrated being nice to animals. Utterly ridiculous. The halacha was that there is no Rosh Hashanah for animals or animal tithes, as it's supposed to be on Elul. We don't hold over that halacha. And the animal tithe was, by the way, when you chose one out of every 10 animals to turn them into a sacrifice, so you'd kill them. But aside from that, it was 100% true. That's a form of false prophecy. There are others out there. There are those who were trying to praise Mrs. Ginsburg as a Jewish religious figure. That's falsehood also. That doesn't exist. There are those who are trying to declare that they know what exactly is going on with COVID. Even the medical professionals still haven't gotten to a consensus. But you've had people declaring unequivocally that they're the experts. They've read enough. They know that COVID is utter nonsense. Or on the other side, there are people who declare that COVID is the worst thing in the world. And the rest of us know that the truth is actually somewhere in between. Yes, we are all annoyed by masks. But like the rabbi said this morning, if the rule is in somebody else's house, don't put your feet on his couch, you don't put your feet on the couch. If where you're going, the rule is please don't come in here without a mask, so you don't wear a mask. It's not your place to choose what to do. Yes, it is disturbing when government gives us all these rules, but that's what governments do. If we don't want a government that imposes on us, perhaps we should vote differently next time. Perhaps we should put in leaders who don't want to take away our rights. It happened once in history. Sometimes leaders restored rights, but in the end there was only man. Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to teach us in this week's parasha that history actually repeats itself. There's nothing new under the sun. I was showing someone today. It says in Kelim, that's one of the Masechtot that doesn't have any Talmud on it, just a Mishnah. And it talks about literally fishnets. It talks about making garments out of fishnets. And it talks about how the harlots of the day used to wear things like that was basically fishnet. You could use netting to make three types of things. You can make garment out of actual fishnets, or you can make the kind of garments that are basically see-through and barely there, or you can make hair coverings like doilies that are fishnets, that are like that. They're netting, you could see a lot of the hair through them. And it says that's the way these old women used to use to cover their hair, and that's a perfectly fine thing. The fact that old women just barely cover their hair, and that's what the Mishnah is referring to. People think nowadays that some women's hair, yes, it's good that women cover their hair, that's a classical thing. To deny that Jewish women, even perhaps unmarried ones, did not cover their hair is to deny the basic fact of history. But to think that they all had their hair hermetically sealed, from cover up their ears and everything, and nothing sticking out, nothing showing through their garments, is also revisionist or wishful thinking. And there's nothing here that's really changed. The people who dress super modestly in order to attract attention, they still dress like that. And the women who are not going overboard with the tznius cult also know that you don't have to hermetically seal your hair under a hat or under your mitpacha, whatever it may be. Nothing changes. The fact is that we can easily take charge of our own history, our own destiny, if we would just read this book, read this Ha'azinu, and understand it, and do something about it. And if not, we will be left at the whims of those who seek to mislead us. We'll be left at the whims of politicians and their acolytes, and people who follow false prophets, or people who declare that, let's say, ignoramai, where people are totally unqualified to be prophets. We have to escape that. We have to know that we are given everything right now. We are given everything today. Moshe Rabbeinu, it's as though he gave us the Torah, especially if you write the Torah, it's as though we received it today. If we were to actually read this for ourselves and learn what it actually says, we'd see that the Torah is easy to keep. It is actually quite easy to keep the Torah. Children learn to keep the Torah as children, and they take it to their adulthood. As we've been pointing out, the Torah is there for our benefit. Keeping the mitzvot and following the words of the sages is a recipe for a good life, and it'll save you from a lot of bad ideas. I'd like to wish everybody a happy and healthy New Year, and don't forget about the Haggadah Pesach. Like, share, and subscribe. Send in your questions or comments, and God willing, before Sukkot, we'll speak a little bit about some new ideas we have regarding this upcoming holiday, which also is severely lacking if we do not hold it in the temple. We have something new this year that we haven't had in years past, and we'll see you then. Have a good one.